Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. Free state. This was not a southern state, the actual court case, Brown versus Board, was a class action lawsuit. You know, where there are multiple plaintiffs, and the name of the case is based on alphabetizing the name of the plaintiffs. Brown was the first name on the list, so that's why it's called Brown versus Board. Yeah, no, they're not. They were not getting the same education. The argument was made before when segregation was declared okay by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, Plessy versus Ferguson. The argument was that separate but equal accommodations were okay, right? But later in Brown versus Board, the argument is that separating people is inherently unequal. To separate people is just not creates inequality. Will eventually create inequality. It also really was unequal. An example being there was a school district in South Carolina in the 1940s and 50s. They spent per student, per student spending at white schools was $179 per student. They only spent $43 per black student. So $179 per white student was spent by this district, $43 per black student. So every dollar that's going to a school with black kids in it, $4 is going to a school with white kids in it. That's pretty substantially unequal. That's a huge difference. So basically, because up to this point, there had been the Missouri Compromise. There had been these compromises, right? The federal government, Congress, had sort of mediated the slavery issue by saying, okay, well, you can be a free state, they can be a slave state, and then we'll do this. They're trying to appease both sides. And in the 1850s, that's just the Mason-Dixon line, which was established in 1820, the Missouri Compromise. The Kansas-Nebraska Act just throws that out the window and says it doesn't matter if it's above or below this line. You can just choose whether you want slavery. And then the Dred Scott case basically says the slaves were brought here to be slaves forever. They're not going to, even if they're free, they're not supposed to be citizens, racializing citizenship, making it exclusive. The Whig Party just dissolves over the issue of slavery. The Whigs go away, and so a new party surfaces called the Republican Party. They're also known as the GOP. Do you guys ever heard that term, the GOP? It stands for Grand Old Party, the Grand Old Party. They're actually the younger of the two political parties. And they are a party that is basically, there are lots of people that vote Republican at the time. Pretty much all abolitionists, if they vote for the Republican Party. And their platform is about, which is in many ways is a very different party than what exists today. And the Democratic Party is a very different party than exists now, right? The Democratic Party at this period, in this period, is going to end up being a party which if you're a white Southerner, like white Southerners basically vote almost exclusively for the Democrats. We're talking, people who are segregationists and in the Ku Klux Klan and all, like after the Civil War, really white supremacist Southern people, they vote almost uniformly with the Democrats. The blue states are free states. This is the Civil War, right? This is what's about to happen. The blue states are the Union, the states that do not secede, right? The yellow states are border states, states where slavery exists, is legal, but do not leave the Union and join the Confederacy, right? Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. Delaware is a slave state. A lot of people don't know because it's so small and boring, and people don't really know anything about Delaware. Who thinks? Unless you're from Delaware, I'm sorry. 1896. Let's look at, this is when there's, the blue states, you see all these, are the Democrats, right? Democratic Party. Those are the states they win in the election. The red states are the Republicans. Take a look at that, right? Democrats in the West and the South, and then in the Pacific and in the North, Republicans. You see that? Get a good look at it, because I'm going to switch it really quick, and then we're going to move on. Get a good look. Blue, look where the blue is. Look, Democrats, red. All right. Now let's not look at the last election because it depresses me. Let's look at 2000. See that? What happened? What happened? It's a complete opposite, right? It's the complete opposite. Complete opposite. The complete reversal of states that voted for one party and today they vote for the opposite party, a different party. This is the election after Lyndon Johnson, a Democrat, signs the Civil Rights Act. You're familiar with the Civil Rights Act? We just had the holiday for Martin Luther King, the March on Washington, right? Civil Rights Act. A Democrat pushes that through, right? The guy who comes in after Kennedy's shot, it's signed into law, and then he runs for re-election in 1964, and he wins by a landslide, but he loses 5 states. Coincidentally, maybe not coincidentally, all southern states. South Carolina being one of them. All of these states that had a large slave population. South Carolina, which was the first state to secede, right? And these are all states that are solidly for the Democratic Party until the Civil Rights Act is signed by a Democrat, and then they decide to switch, and they switch parties. So you have a Republican Party whose platform is this idea of free soil, free labor, and free men. The idea that free soil, the land, the United States, the actual ground we're standing on, like the territory, should be free. New states coming in should be free. We should not allow slavery to expand, right? Free soil. And part of that is the idea once Lincoln becomes president, what's called the Homestead Act. The idea that land out west, when it becomes states, should be free so that Americans can move out there and have their own piece of land. Whereas with a state where slavery is legal, you might create a situation where wealthy slave owners are going to move in, purchase a bunch of land, and have slaves work it. And it's going to make it less conducive to development for other things, and also for the average person to go out and farm there, basically. So free soil, free labor, right? Not fair labor, free labor. The idea that people are free, we're all free, right? We have the right to get compensated. If you go to work at wherever, if you have a job somewhere, you work at anywhere, right? A factory back then, or if you work at like any sort of like big box store or anywhere, you have the right to compensation for the time you are giving, right? For your labor. Like you have control over, you're free. You have control over your own body and your own time. You're not a slave. And so if you walk into somewhere and you punch in for somebody and you work for them, for their company, they have to pay you, right? Because you're giving them your time and your energy. So free labor, right? Which means that slavery needs to end at some point. Ending slavery, ensuring that land out west is open to homesteads, to small farm, average Americans getting land. But remember that's an important part about this. That means obviously that indigenous people who are out there are still going to be removed. So even though the Republican Party at this time is opposed to slavery, and the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, ends up ending slavery, abolishing slavery through the 13th Amendment, and then this same party ends up giving full citizenship to slaves with the 14th, equal citizenship, the 14th Amendment, right? They then look west to the indigenous people that are still here and say, this 14th Amendment doesn't apply to you. You're not citizens. And so the same country, the same government, the same party that basically occupies the South and forces the southern states to recognize citizenship for African Americans, former slaves, is also the same group that basically pushes Native Americans onto reservations so there's nobody's perfect. See, this is the thing. Nothing's black and white. It's all grayscale.